Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. BC here, coming to you with another episode of Oddcast the Podcast. Today, it's my distinct pleasure to sit down with my good friend, Douglas McKee. Douglas is the author of Mental Mechanics, a Repair Manual, Already Wise, Our Inborn Ability to Make Our Best Choices, and Life is All About Skills, an accredited course for registered nurses. He's currently participating in Veteran Mission Possible, an intense and innovative effort to decrease the incidence of veteran suicide. Douglas has been following the work that I've been doing with the World Empowered and has been especially enthused with the Awe Kids program that we're creating. So it's my distinct pleasure to get to have this conversation with my good friend, Douglas McKee. Douglas, how are you today, my friend?
I am fine, Brian, and thank you for all those kind words.
I think.
And I am enthused.
One of us is muted.
One of us is muted?
Still can't hear you.
Mine doesn't say it's muted.
We're good.
Okay, we're good. Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, that's quite all right. All right. I'm fine.
So tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. How did you get to where you are and what you're doing with your life?
I'm a nurse anesthetist or nurse anesthesiologist, whatever you want to call me. I'll show up. And about 5 years after I got out of residency, one day I realized that my patients were a whole lot more anxious about what I was going to do to them than I was about what I was going to do to them. And from that point on, I started wanting, and that puts us in the late 70s, okay? Just as a little bit of perspective. And so I wanted to find out how I could help my patients be less anxious. First thing I did was taught myself to meditate. You know, there was nobody around. I mean, I was in southwestern Colorado, and there was nobody around. There was a group of hippies living up, in the mountains, and I knew they were really spiritual. You know, and the closer you got, you could smell the incense. I think it was incense anyway.
Incense or patchouli, right?
Something like that. But there, so I learned to meditate, and then one day I just I walked out. I meditated in my bedroom, and when I walked out of the bedroom, I had this epiphany that says, when you're meditating, you are connected or reunited with all there is. It is an incredible experience, and it's bliss, and it's really cool. But when you walk out the door, the same old world is there. And I followed this for a while, and then I thought, it has to do with thinking, because when I'm thinking, I'm not at peace. When I'm not thinking, I am at peace. So that started the whole thing about learn how people think. And I started, asking my friends, the ones who were good parents. I said, how do you parent? The ones who had good relationships. How do you have good relationships? And all that. And I said, how do you do it? And it became fairly obvious, I thought, rapidly, that it's all about skills. And so it just kind of, there wasn't the internet at that time. So information kind of dribbled in slowly over a period of years. But then I started jotting down my thoughts. And the first thing I said is, okay, life is all, or mental mechanics is what the first book was about. And it's called a repair manual. And what it does is it proposes how we think. And it shows how it's not amazing. It's not magic. We think, and the way we think creates results that we either like or don't like. And there were things in the book that science hadn't gotten around to yet. But as soon as they caught up, I started adding them. Changes, one of the biggest changes, I used to talk about fear a lot. And but now I realize that fear and anxiety are two vastly different processes. Fear is a fully automatic, unconscious reaction to potential danger, and we have zero control over it. That's fine. It saves our bacon a lot. Anxiety, on the other hand, is a conscious process. And some guys in France figured this out about 10, 15 years ago, and they tracked the neural traffic. And the neural traffic for anxiety goes to the prefrontal cortex, where it's evaluated and a decision is made. And if the outcome is going to be scary, then it fires off fight or flight. So fear and anxiety feel the same, but we don't want to do anything about fear, but we are absolutely able to use the processes that already exist in our brain to significantly, I would say 70 to 80% of our anxiety can be prevented.
Well, I look forward to getting into that a little deeper. One of the things that I started when I was working with the kids, so I was the youth facilitator for the Grand Families Coalition. These were children that were adopted by their grandparents because their biological parents lost their rights. So you can imagine the horrific situations and circumstances that these youth had endured to end up in that position. And,
True.
I taught them that our beliefs create our thoughts create our feelings create our actions, and our actions create our results, which leads back to support our inner beliefs. So if we really want to change our lives, if we want to head in a different direction, the first thing that we ought to look at are our beliefs, like our belief about ourselves, our belief about our potential. And how does that resonate with some of the scientific findings and what you've learned and written about in your
I think
book?
it resonates loudly. There's an awful lot of need for self-reflection, not necessarily self-doubt. I gave up, believing that everything I know is actual. As a matter of fact, there's how many 7 billion of us on the planet now, and I think there's 7 billion different realities, which ought to tell us something. But but children are especially vulnerable to things like that, because that's one of the neatest scientific things that came out in the late 90s was by a group up in Canada. And what they did is they started looking at how do children learn, toddlers. Okay. And I think I gave you the quiz that I gave everybody else when I asked you, true or false, at least 90 to 95% of our serious emotional problems and suffering come from three things we do all the time: relationships, make choices, and manage emotions. Was that true or false?
True.
And you said true. Definitely. So my next question was, how old are we when the development of our skills with those three things peaks? And if I remember correctly,
I answered that question very wrong. I thought that, our development of those skills would probably peak around somewhere between 18 and 25. They say that, your brain isn't fully developed until around 25, 26. So that was kind of my assumption. And you shocked me with the answer that you had arrived at scientifically.
Well, it wasn't that I really arrived at it. I just copied what they said. And what they said was 18 months.
That's crazy to me.
Yeah. What we tend to think is that children, babies, are basically not learning much. But they're using, the part of their brain that they're using is our mammal brain, and it has no language, has no capacity to reason, and has no sense of time. What it does is it watches and copies the behavior of the individuals in that little tiny environment. Okay. Just like, a cat learns to be a cat by watching other cats, dogs and dogs.
That's why it's easier to train a dog when you already have a well-trained dog.
Something like that. Absolutely. Once you're well-trained in training dogs, when you speak dog, training a dog is okay. And if you speak cat, you can get along with them. I don't think you could ever train one. But so anyway, those guys said that the development of our skills with relationships, emotions, and making choices begins at the moment of our conception, peaks at 18 months, is mature before we start school, and even our executive network, the thing that's supposed to make us so intelligent and everything, that's mature by age 7 and unlikely to change after that. And what it tells me is that the reason we have so many problems as teens and adults is that we're using the life skills designed and built into us and habituated, into our brains for managing a 5-year-old's world to run our lives as teens and adults. And so they just don't work.
This is why we often hear people say that, I'm dealing with a 40-year-old adult child. Is we literally haven't grown beyond the skills that we acquired in infancy to be able to manage a human adult life in a healthy, well-balanced manner.
That's exactly right. And it's amazing our ability to learn incredibly complex and complicated skills and do them well. And I'm going to use airplane pilots as a marvelous example, because they are taught how to think about flying in a way that doesn't create errors.
Okay.
That's basically how they're trained. And they do. It's safer to fly in a big jumbo jet than it is to walk across the street. However, their divorce rate, alcoholism, alcohol and drug abuse rates are really high. So their emotional lives are, not quite what they would like, but you can point at all kinds of professions and say the same thing. I just like to use pilots because they're really trained well. And, and it's one of the instructor manuals.
At the technical side of things, they're trained well.
Well, think about all the technical things, my anesthesia training.
Yes.
That's very technical. I better do it right. Surgery, computers, you name it. Highly technical stuff we can learn, but that doesn't really translate into having a one-on-one nurturing interpersonal relationship or decent relationship with our children.
Yeah, it's the emotional training that we seem to be lacking.
Well, that's part of it. You led me right to it.
It seems like a distinction between EQ and IQ, the emotional quotient versus the intelligence quotient.
Well, that's true. I do have problems, some philosophic problems with EQ, because it's built on our ability to identify emotions in other people and take that and use it in ourselves. And I think that I don't want to involve anybody else in my emotions.
Okay.
Because I create them. And actually what I think emotions are is it's a sensory part of our memories. When we do something we like, our brain creates all kinds of positive neurotransmitters. And then years later, when we think about it, we still feel good.
Right.
Okay. Same thing with bad things. If we don't do something well, we create, it creates bad or unwanted, maybe intolerable results. And what was reflected back to us in those outcomes is that we act in real time, but we also evaluate. Excuse me.
Get a drink.
Yeah. It's green tea. It just looks like something else.
It looks like moonshine. A big jug of it.
Yeah. But we act in real time, but we evaluate the results of our choices and our actions based on our past. And so if I do something loving, I see myself as loving. But if what I do turns to crap, I see myself as crap. It's pretty simple. So emotions they're just the neurotransmitters, the feelings. They're the meanings we apply to feelings.
Or the feelings that stem from the meanings that we have attached to circumstances.
Well, yeah, that's that. But it's sensory. Maybe I should use sensory rather than feelings, because we use feelings and synonyms, or feelings and emotions as synonyms, and they aren't. Because as soon as you put on your clothes, your body feels it. But in about 15 seconds, you no longer feel it. So
Right.
you can have feelings without emotions, but you cannot have emotions without feelings.
So what do we do with it?
Okay, what we do
If
with
our
it is,
development really peaks around 18 months for our ability to navigate these challenging emotions that arise, what can people do about that?
well, the ideal thing is for parents to learn to control theirs first. So the child doesn't have to struggle with an awful lot of them and then relearn them, hopefully. But as we're seeing right now, that it's emotional turmoil is the soup du jour. Everybody's got it. I think I sent you a book. Did you get it?
I did get it. That was 2 days before I left for Florida, and haven't been back until 1 a.m. last night. So I haven't had a chance to look at it.
Yeah, I just don't understand this. Good-looking guy takes off on a vacation with a good-looking girl, and he doesn't do his homework.
I'm not on my phone or technology. I don't know what's wrong. My priorities are all messed up, Douglas.
Yeah, but anyway, it's the book is called The Continuum Concept by Gene Liedloff, and I would commend it to everyone's reading. But what it shows, she was born, she was born early in the century, and she ended up going with some guys to do some diamond hunting or gold hunting in the Amazon as a college age lady. And she met this indigenous tribe, and she lived with them for a while. And then she goes back to France, because that's where she's going to college, and she gets her bachelor's degree, and she goes back and she lives with them again. And then she goes back to France, and she ends up being a psychiatrist, and she goes back and lives with them. And she makes she just drops the pearl that says, I almost missed it. What I was seeing in these people that I lived with was the evolution of parenting. She said, because they had not been messed with yet by Coca-Cola or the Catholics.
Right.
They were left alone, and they had no inter-family or inter-tribe rivalries. There was no violence. The kids just ran free. Everybody, it did take the whole tribe didn't work at raising them. They were just who they were. But it was such the old kids would look after the young kids. They all played, and it was, but you see, they had the needs. There's, that's needs and wants. We take those as synonyms, and there aren't. And there's a whole chapter in one of my books about synonyms that aren't, because one of them is empowering and one of them is disempowering. Needs and wants are that they had needs, and they understood that that's what life was about. And needs, there's only three as far as I can tell: food, shelter, and nurturing. But the difference between needs and wants is that needs, I have to do the action to fulfill the need. I have to eat. Obviously, I'm really good at that. I have to find shelter to protect myself from the inclement weather. And if I want to meet my need for nurturing, I must nurture. And so that was all they asked. And then we come along with civilization, and civilization is all built on competition, and competition rewards aggression. So the most aggressive people become the leaders, and they can't help themselves. They're just, borderline psychopaths, and they just lead their civilization off the cliff and into abyss, the abyss. But that's all about wants. Wants do not meet needs. Fame, fortune, cash, education, whatever it is, cannot meet the need for nurturing.
So what really is that distinction, that line in the sand between a need and a want, in your estimation?
Well, if a need will take care of one of three things: food, shelter, and nurturing.
Okay.
Anything else is a want.
So emotionally, what's the distinction, and how does that affect us on a daily level?
All depends. Some people have these huge emotional attachments to food, and we can see them. 50% of Americans are now diagnosably, obese or better, or obese or more obese. And we have attachments to money. We have attachments to all kinds of things, and those emotions those are the attachments. We believe that those attachments will somehow bring us those wants, will somehow fulfill our needs. They will make us feel whole. One of the examples I've used for years was that the teenage boy doesn't want a car because it's a car. It's status, it's sex, it's, mobility, it's, freedom, it's all kinds of things. The want is we're projecting some kind of values in it that we think will fulfill the hole in our heart that's only fillable with nurturing.
As if it were some sort of indication of our value.
True.
That's how we base and measure our value and place in the world.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we think if we're rich, everybody's going to love us, and if we're famous, everybody, well, whatever. It doesn't work.
Yeah, one of the things that has been really important, that I feel that we need to share this understanding of our intrinsic value, because I feel like we place a lot, especially in children, we place so much value in the wrong areas and don't spend enough time really exploring and researching like who we are, our place in the world, the value and gift that we can bring, the thing that makes us unique, our unique differentiator. And we try to place our value, our sense of self-worth and importance on the validation and acceptance of others. And I when I'm speaking to high schoolers, when I'm going in and talking to youth, that external validation will never outweigh our internal dialogue.
True.
No matter how many voices are in the background telling us how wonderful we are, how amazing or beautiful or handsome or intelligent, or whether we're a social media influencer with 100,000 followers or we've got one friend, like external validation will never compensate and create self-acceptance. True. We have to learn who we are. We have to understand our value. We have to believe in in our competency and the quality of our heart, our compassion and caring and nurturing for others, and place our value on those things. Because as long as we're looking for and seeking the validation, appreciation, and acceptance from other people, we're always going to be deficient. We're always going to be operating from a sense of lack and at the whims and the wills and the opinions of others.
I would say amen, pass the hat. That was really good, really well done. I would say that people struggle with the whole concept of values, and what I basically you've already heard me talking about synonyms that aren't.
Right.
And I go to great lengths to define words in ways that I think we can understand what I'm trying to say. And basically, what I say about values is what we do is, or what we do is what we value, and what we value is what we do.
Mm.
So if we want to see what our values are, we look at the choices we make and the actions we perform. We don't ask anybody else. We just look at that. And, somebody like you ought to just be tickled to death to get up in the morning, because, what you do is all about, nurturing others. I mean, I'm just, I love chills.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I told you a little bit, like I had that motorcycle accident August 8th, 1997. And then I recovered from a drug addiction that lasted about 2.5 years after that. I've spent the majority of my life since then trying to live in such a way that if today is my last day and I'm called before my maker, that I can say that I've done the best that I can with the time that I've been given. I think that all of us, for me, I think that the key to life is to be the best version of us as possible, to find our unique value and the gift that we're meant to offer, and find a way to give that in a way that benefits society as a whole, and stop comparing ourselves to other people. And the only thing that really matters at the end of the day, at the end of our life, is how we feel about the way that we've lived, the value that we've contributed, the things that we've brought to our loved ones or society at large. And since my accident, I want to be able to say, if I walk out on the street or I slip in the tub and I get struck by lightning or a meteor hits me, I want to be able to say when I meet my maker that I did the best that I could with the time I was given. I tried to live in such a way that I made the world a better place.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt. I'm sure your little gold crown is waiting for you. I'm sure. And I, you're absolutely right. But there are an awful lot of people that don't understand the difference between needs and wants. You see, if let's go back to the toddler. The toddler doesn't know what it needs. It knows what it wants. I mean, aside from, my tummy's, I'm hungry. Give me something. They're fairly vocal, but it's learning. And that's the modeling of behaviors by others.
Okay.
Shows us what's important. And that's special. That's how we are conditioned, from the get-go. And I'm sure that Elon Musk had a meltdown not too long ago about what's Bezos's wife's name, who's giving away all the money, and Bezos just can't. She just can't figure that out. How can she give away $100 million? She's an idiot. Well, I think, well, that's not the reason she's alive, is to get more money. But see, he doesn't get it. She gets it. It's pretty simple. When we help someone else, that's the thing that we see ourselves as helpful. But when we take from somebody, like you said, there's no amount of fame or fortune can cover it up in here.
Again, we need to understand the thing that we can contribute, that the value that we offer and how we can make a difference. Because at the end of the day, that's the only way that we'll ever find self-acceptance. And to know that who we are as a person is good enough at our core, because we act and live from that place and know the value that we bring, and that we do make a positive, even if it's just not just, but even if it's raising good children and having a tight-knit family, and the rest of your life is spent doing a menial job that you don't enjoy, but knowing that the impact that has, and that you're living your life as the best version of you as possible. We have to know that. We have to know that it's not based on other people's opinions. And again, I think helping children figure out the difference between needs and wants will be very valuable to know that. I don't know. It just goes back for me. It goes back to the feeling that all of our priorities as a society are very misplaced at the moment. And
I could not agree with you more. I mean, that's basically the reason that there are so many people so upset. They're adrift.
Yeah, and I mean nihilism, right? You're familiar with Viktor Frankl, I believe he was a psychiatrist in Auschwitz and Dachau. And he wrote once that there's nothing so powerful as the knowledge that there's meaning to one's life.
Yeah, it is. And whenever I am tempted to listen to my genes in my early programming and, get pretty fussy, I think about Victor, because he was in the concentration camps for 3 years and he came out whole. I mean, WHOLE with a capital W. And I think if he could put up with that and go from inmate to inmate, comforting, helping, I have no excuse. I mean, he was on the ragged edge of being killed every day, all the time. Just if a guard took a whim, bam, he's dead. And it was like, it is what it is. I mean, he was at one time a phenomenal Christian, a phenomenal Jew, and a phenomenal Buddhist. He was just everything good about mankind. I have lots of quotes, but the one I like, besides yours, is that the brain is a stimulus response organ, but between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our ability to choose, and in our choice lies our freedom. And so that's why your effort and your absolute dogged determination to help these kids learn how to meditate is so critically important, because meditation to me turned out not to be the destination, but the beginning point, the starting point.
Yeah, that's the vehicle.
Yeah, I want to share something.
We call it intentional breathing because there's often a religious connotation that people tend to associate with the word meditation. I actually don't personally agree with that. My familiarity with Buddhism, I don't actually associate that with a religion that's not praying to or worshiping a particular deity.
Right, it's not.
But in our program, we're teaching intentional breathing. Simply breathe to the point where your diaphragm expands or diaphragm fills and your belly expands, rather than breathing to the top quarter of your lungs. And that simple action of breathing in through your nose until your belly expands instigates or incites the vagus nerve and decreases our sympathetic nervous system and gets rid of cortisol, and it gives you the oxytocin, the cuddle chemical, and helps you feel connected to and part of other people. The benefits to intentional breathing, even outside of a quote unquote religious practice like Hinduism or Buddhism, it has incredible medically proven benefits on all kinds of different areas. You said you wanted to show something, that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I wanted to share something. Oh, where'd that thing go?
Was it this?
No, it's this one. Let's see, where are we?
The butterfly quadrant?
No, it wasn't the butterfly quadrant. It's the next slide after that. No, it's that one. It's that one. Yeah, the butterfly quadrant. Yeah. Okay. And the reason that what I want to talk about is, and you're absolutely right. When if you watch babies breathe, they breathe abdominally. But by the time they're in the first grade, they're breathing in the top half because they're anxious. Okay. Now, what almost all contemplation, we can call it contemplation, almost all of the practices begin with the breath, a huge number. And what it does is we can no longer breathe abdominally and think about the usual stuff that's going on in our life. We have to put so much focus on that we enter that state because we are not thinking about the stuff that bothers us. What we're thinking about is the air. And it just actually moves us to this point here. I got two arrows. But anyway, this one, in this butterfly quadrant, it took me years to kind of get, my brain wrapped around this. But there's that story about the butterfly flapping its wings can set into motion, forces that will turn into a tornado. But basically what it is how a tiny bit of energy can make a huge change, or an individual can make a huge change. And what I was talking about is when we are practicing those with breath or whatever you want, whatever label you want to use, this is the point. The crosshairs is where we want to be, because this up and down is energy, and the right to the left is actions.
Okay.
And so if we're looking at, the negative side and we're liberating energy, it's still competition, which is negative. If we are looking here and, we're down here in real tough stuff, then we're constraining. We're actually keeping things from happening. But over here, we can actually be making positive actions, but we're maintaining. That's what happens in huge organizations like religions. You have the brilliant mind and soul and spirit that says, I'm what you can be. I'm nothing special. I'm just you making different choices. But pretty soon, they have a flock, and then pretty soon they need some maintainers, some bureaucrats to take care of it and keep it going. And so they work hard at making sure that things don't change. And so, but here is the point. This is the point that I like to be when I'm doing a practice. Or this is a point where if we train our brain to do this, this is the point where we will live. We will be here. We will not automatically react to anything. We will maintain our peace. And that means we're at zero. We get to make a choice. This is the space that Viktor Frankl was talking about, because we can make the choice, and we do make the choice. That's the only essence of free will that we have, is our ability to make the choice of what are we going to do next. And this is where you live. This is where you live. And this
Most
is where
of the
I
time.
live.
I work to stay there. Sometimes I oscillate between all four quadrants, depending on how much sleep I've gotten, or my personal finances, or personal relationships. But yes, I do strive to maintain equilibrium and stay in that upper right-hand quadrant of collaboration between liberating and positive action.
Yeah, we see that's what before we had civilizations, everything we did as tribes was built on cooperation, collaboration, and coordination, collaboration, cooperation. Okay. But that doesn't work in ours. We do not collaborate. We do not cooperate. We do not coordinate. Everybody's kind of out there grabbing what they can, running off with it. And so we miss it. We miss the opportunity.
Why do you think that is? Because my initial impression is in today's society, we operate predominantly from a scarcity poverty mindset, which keeps us in the either constraining or conserving quadrants. And I'm quite certain that that's where the majority of people operate the majority of the time, is that conserving, constraining quadrant based on a poverty or lack mindset. And I don't understand why we've gravitated to that degree, if that hypothesis is accurate. When we live in the most opulent time in human history, why did they not fall into that pitfall of poverty mindset when they were, living on the prairie in the tribes? First of all, do you think my hypothesis is correct? That's the majority of the time that we live in that poverty mindset, and that's why we.
I think you're right. I think I think you're right. I said just a little bit ago that all civilizations are built on competition. It begins that they're competing for a limited number of resources. And in biology, what it says is competition is striving for a goal that cannot be shared. Okay, so that's why all the wars are fought, because somebody else has something we want. We go after it because they won't give it to us. But eventually, it creates within the people, they're competing for a job. They have to feed themselves because we no longer have the ability to feed ourselves. So we have to compete with a job. We have to compete. And in the last couple hundred years, human beings only change when the environment in which they live changes enough that they must change in order to survive and thrive. Sound reasonable? Okay. And if you look at the last couple hundred years, or the last 100, you can see that the velocity of change has been so great that everybody's focus has switched from cooperation, collaboration, and coordination and our interpersonal relationships to learning new skills so they can survive.
So
and it wasn't, in the late 20s, the Lehman Brothers Bank, one of their guys said, we need to re-educate the human mind toward desires. We cannot stand this thing of them meeting needs. We want them to chase desires, because that's a hole that will never get filled. And the banker knew it. And so then they started saying, instead of these boots will last forever, just say, well, don't these boots look nice? Here, get this nice looking car, get this nice looking dress, get this nice looking suit, whatever. Join the good guys. That's where the advertising went. And so we were seduced by the dark side into becoming truly competitive, but the competitive, always competing, we are behind. Like you said, we're functioning from a position of lack, where we don't have the lack actually, but we have been taught that we do.
Yeah, in this country, at least, even the quote unquote impoverished are better off than anybody was 300 years ago. The low income, middle class America, even the impoverished in this country, at least, and you and I have traveled around to some developing countries, and we know what true lack and struggle is. But we're better off on the whole than anybody was 300 years ago, save for the top 1%. And we still have this insatiable need to want for more. And it's curious how that is so ingrained.
Well, you see, if you take a look at our attitudes, our relationships, and by the way, all our brain does is relationships. Imaginary, real, physical, whatever. But what was I going to say?
Paying attention to relationships.
Right. But we learned those before we could figure out that they didn't work. Because you see, the toddler brain has no ability to reason. So it accepts everything as a fact.
Okay.
And then it practices what it knows until it becomes, the subconscious habits. But it can't reason. And by the time it can reason, it doesn't. It never occurs to it. And an awful lot of people, I think, are drowning in their own suffering because they've tried to change. They've tried diligently to change, but they didn't know how to change. There's so many shysters out there saying, act as if, pretend that you've got it, picture this. The secret will get you anything you want. Well, the secret won't, because there's a big difference between synonyms, aren't. Intention and expectation. Intention is hoping something will work, and expectation is what you believe is going to work.
Exactly. So that goes back to my wheel of life and how your beliefs create your thoughts, create your feelings, create your actions.
Yeah.
There is value in act as if you can actually get to the place where you're grateful for what you already have and what you know you will eventually get. It gets you out of that poverty mindset. So I don't entirely disagree with the premise, but I do think that there's a lot of holes. And one of the biggest things, to your point, that I think it leaves out is that belief part. Because if you don't believe that you can get what you want, or if you don't believe that you deserve to have what you want, you will immediately either repel or destroy whatever it is good that's coming into your life.
Okay. Well, I think most stress and depression is built on the belief that you won't get it. Yep. I mean, and I talk about fear and anxiety. Let me kind of clarify that just a little bit. My chief always said that all the processes that are at work in our body and our brain are conserved. In other words, they've been there for a long time, and because they have pro-survival functions. Now, so what possible pro-survival function could anxiety offer? And all I thought about was, finally I read a little ditty by some anthropologists, and it kind of dawned on me that actually anxiety, far from being a mental illness, is one of the most important conscious concepts or conscious processes our brain ever developed, because it gave us the ability to imagine a known danger. Now, this is 1 million years ago, so think lions, tigers, and bears, and develop skills and strategies to avoid becoming lunch. Okay. Now, there's some people out there now saying depression is biologic. I'm going to say, well, it can't be, because if you go sit down out in the middle of the things where you're surrounded by lions and hyenas and everything, you're lunch, and those genes would disappear. So it's not a genetic deal. But we don't have lions and tigers and bears today. What we have is our imaginary futures, where we are either going to lose something we have, we're going to not get something we want, or we are going to get something that we do not want. That is our belief system. See, our belief system is based on our ability and our skills at being able to create tolerable and sustainable results. And if I've tried and tried and tried and it doesn't work, pretty soon, no matter how much I want it to work, I come to the belief that it won't. And that's depression. That's helplessness, hopelessness. And yes, it's a reflection of my experience.
So do you believe there's any chemical, physiological, or genetic influence on depression, or you believe that's entirely psychosomatic and it's all a fabrication of our imagination? Because it seems to me that I have met some people that seem to have a legitimate chemical, physiological abnormality or deficiency. So I would imagine that, for at least from my experience and some of the people that I've met, that it can be an actual chemical issue, which could be genetic.
Well, the Pfizer study that nailed that was, it was, and that's a big thing on Google, was take this test and see if you need an antidepressant.
Right.
And basically everything, didn't matter what you answered, it was going to lead you to, yes, you need one. And so they talked about a chemical imbalance in the brain, and the chemical imbalance is there, but it is the result. It is not the cause.
Okay.
People don't get depressed just all of a sudden. It takes a while. And it's that chemical imbalance. The chemical changes, because if you think happy thoughts, you're happy. If you think peaceful thoughts, it's peaceful. But if you think you're worthless and you're hopeless, and no matter how hard you try, then it becomes
never going to work out. Yeah. And that to me is the pandemic of our society, especially today. I mean, Viktor Frankl talked about it in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, how nihilism is the undoing of man. And this belief that nothing we do matters, who we are doesn't matter, and it's all for naught, which is completely despairing. Like if that's truly your fundamental belief system, that nothing you do will matter, nothing ever matters, you're going to you came from dust, you return to dust, and everything's going to be gone and it doesn't matter, then that's a totally depressing and catastrophic belief system to operate from. So it's impossible not to be a manic depressive if that's your fundamental belief system.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, because the chemicals that are part of your thought create the feelings that reflect back to you who you are. Okay, I'd like to share something else.
Yeah, and our minds can't tell the difference between reality and imagination. So you can sit there and you can play a movie in your mind of an imaginary outcome and still have the same feelings, and you can still get the same dopamine hits, you can still get the serotonin spikes, you can still have the same physiological response to your imagination as you would to an actual outcome or an actual event. You can foretell this and create these feelings.
PTSD is one of the best examples of that, because PTSD doesn't happen instantly after a real traumatic event. It takes 60 to 90 days to develop it.
Okay.
And, nobody quite knows how to, what the flashbacks, what is the actual trigger, but there's a trigger in there that says this is danger, and danger, the most dangerous thing that can happen is what happened to them. Let me share. I want to share this thing again, and I want to talk about anxiety a little bit.
So you're saying anxiety is the physiological response to an imagined future?
Yes. And this is I think one of, if I want to be proud of something that I've done, this is it. I want you to think about learning to drive. Do you remember how anxious you were when you learned to drive?
Yeah, I mean, my dad was the one teaching me, so.
Mine too. So anyway, so here we are. There are two components, and what it is this is the one of severity of the consequences, and this is the level of competence, and this is anxiety. So if our competence is low, which is 0 when we're learning to drive, and the consequences are potentially fatal, then our anxiety about being able to do the skill without triggering the consequence is enormous. That's what anxiety is. I'm predicting a future. I'm going to kill myself with this car.
Like
But as we get
skydiving for the first time.
That's right. That's right. You can see ketchup, right? But
exactly.
Anyway, so after we do this level, after we become more competent, our anxiety starts decreasing because we are learning to trust ourselves to do the skill without triggering the consequences. Can you see that?
Yeah. And before we continue, I have a question. Okay. So what do you say to those who have sudden onset panic attacks? They're incredibly anxious to the point of like heart palpitations and racing, but they say, because I've known people that have gone through this, they say that it's come out of nowhere. They literally weren't thinking about anything, but it just came. What do you say to that scenario?
Okay,
are they simply not aware of their
and
thoughts?
One of them called me when they are not, and it's what is the trigger? Doesn't matter. What is the response is the critical part. One of my daughters called, and I answered the phone, and she said, "I'm going to have a panic attack," because she'd had a few. And like she said, you just get this it's kind of like an aura. It's kind of like you're going to have a seizure or something. You know it. And I said, "Well, sit down." She said, "I'm on the freeway." And I thought for about 2 seconds, and I said, "What? That's the dumbest thing you could possibly do. You're driving a car. You can't have a damn panic attack. What do you think you're doing?" She said, "Why are you yelling at me?" And I said, "Well, I had to get you mad because you changed your mind."
Right.
And I said, "How's your panic attack?" And she says, "Gone." I said, "Right." I said, "Call me when you get home and let's talk about this." Because you see, you talked about the thing that goes on. I'm gonna you talked about the chemical balance and how yeah. And what the you talked about the movie, and what the panic attack is probably it is the highest example of what human imagination can do, because we accept it as absolute. We accept that it is happening now. We accept that I am unable to stop it. I do not know what is happening, and I'm completely out of control, and I may die. And what I do is I teach people, it's a mental chemical spiral. I just like a rocket taking off. I said, but when you feel it, it's a mental chemical process. When you feel it start, reach over and turn off the light switch. And just that amount of involvement stops it. Because, once they hear somebody say it's a mental chemical race, but we have to believe that it is real, that it is, and the catecholamines that it's creating are actual, but there isn't. And I think the one thing about panic attacks is nobody knows why they have them. Nobody knows what they're panicking about. Now, as PTSD, they know exactly what they're panicking about. But with panic attacks, it's unknown. So I say, well, if you don't know it, there isn't one. All it is this kind of this wild, eruption of thought, chemical, and it just takes off. But I said, if you just reach over and turn off the switch, it stops the process.
So what's a life skill that can help them turn off the switch? Is it that actual thought and movement
That's just
That
that's
process
it.
just being like off.
When you feel it, reach over and turn off the switch. Because you said the whole thing about going back to the quadrant, and there's two things that have to happen in life is all about skills. Number one is that we need to be able to stop doing the things that are causing the problems. And most of that is we need to stop our negative thinking. Okay. Now, we can do that. We do it all the time. I mean, true or false, you can change your mind instantly when you think you need to.
True.
Okay. I have an awful lot of, not an awful lot, but I have more pushback on that than any other question I ask. And so I've kind of been trying to think about how to language it differently. And what I say is,
I believe you get a lot of pushback on that. I think that I'm kind of an exception in that area. I think a lot of people will tell you that they can't change their thoughts or emotions that quickly.
okay, that's why I came up with this. And let me see what you think of it and okay. How many times during all the conversations that you have during the day do you say the first thing that pops into your mind?
Me personally,
Well,
almost never.
that's right. Almost never. That's right. And so you see what that tells you is that you are okay. You thought one response, you say, no, I'm going to say something else. You changed your mind instantly because you thought you needed to. And so what it tells us is if we can change our mind instantly when we think we need to, guess what? We can change our mind when we want to.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're trying to get somewhere and the directions on your GPS tell you you need to turn right at the next light, and you get there and there's an accident or someone's lying in the street. You instantly okay, I can't go that way. I need to go a different way. I need to circumvent this situation and change directions, even if it's only momentary. You can change your mind about something like that quickly. That indicates that yes, you can change your mind about anything that quickly.
That's exactly right. And that's that's the basis for the first skill that I teach people. And because as you said, said, thoughts are like movies. Now, we'd never watch a movie that we didn't like, would we? We would change the channel or turn off the set. And that's why the movie's called change, or the skill is called change the channel. And it uses our ability, because the only reason people don't change their minds is they don't know how to access that subconscious process that goes on in our brain consciously. They don't know how to use it. So what I do is say, this is how you use it. And it's based upon, there's a huge difference between worry or anxiety and danger. Danger is smoke, fire, guns, knives, poisons, and politicians. And when you see danger, what do? You run, right? But if you're feeling a little anxious or angry or some negative emotion and you look around and there is no danger, where are those feelings coming from? They're coming from the story that you're telling it. Those are part of the memories, part of the association, part of the meaning are those negative emotions. But they're part of the movie. So it also uses the thing between sensation and perception. That, like Viktor Frankl said, there is a space. This is the space. The space is, you heard it. Your perception over here says change. Okay, so there it is. There's the space. So when you start feeling a negative emotion, you look around. Is there danger? Does two things. It stops the process, just like in a panic attack or anything else. It stops the process because you're looking. Is there danger? And when you say the word danger, that part of your brain comes online. And believe me, that takes precedence, because your survival takes precedence over everything else. Okay, so you look to the right, you look to the left. If there's danger, run. And if there's not, you have the option then to change the channel, to think about something, to choose your next thought. And so when you do that, you choose something that is either neutral or a pleasant memory. That's really important, because neutral, like a fact, or there's a picture, there's whatever, or a pleasant memory, because your brain can verify those. That's why most positive thinking techniques don't work.
Yeah, it's a
Because your
constant
brain,
tug of war.
your brain says BS. I'm out of here. Didn't
That
work.
cognitive dissonance thing gives you rope burn, because all day long, I mean, I tried that, man, when I was depressed and really low and had the worst self-esteem you could imagine. I would tell myself, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself,
And you're good.
10,000, 20,000 times a day. And it was this constant tug of war. I love myself. No, you don't. I love myself. No, you don't. And it didn't, I mean, it kept, as long as I kept doing it, it kept the pendulum somewhere in the center. But as soon as I stopped, it would swing all the way back to the other side again.
Yeah. That's why change the channel is so cool, because it accesses the same pathways in our brain as breathing practice or whatever, but it takes 5 seconds or less. And it's much more applicable to the Western mind, because a lot of people will not take time to do the practices. I'd love to tell the story about, I work in a teaching hospital, so I'm surrounded by students of all kinds and everything. And one day there were a group of 4 nice young women, and so I taught them change the channel, not realizing that one of them was a chief resident. Now chief residents don't ask for advice; they give advice. Well, actually, they give orders. So the next day, I bumped into her, and I said, "So have you been using Change the Channel?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Do you think it'll change your life?" She said, "Already has." And I said, "Well, that's music to my ears. Tell me how." She said, "It's a tool that I can use, and it is implementable, it is insightful, and it's applicable. Bingo, done." And she said so I use it. She said, and I taught it to my daughter, another daughter who's a CEO. And what she does is she uses it to interrupt all the trash that's going on so she can be more productive at work. Because it's about getting to that 0 point where we make the decision, not our baby brain.
Yeah, I believe it was Lao Tzu that said, between your breath and your thought, there's a space. Let's meet there.
Yeah. And seeing this, it's really cool, because the space exists. It's the perception, like a sensation, and naming the sensation. And that takes anywhere from 0.2, from 20 milliseconds to a half a second. And so one of the blogs I wrote said that it's the most important half second in your life. And
just to know that it exists, no matter how minuscule it might seem. A lot of people believe that their emotions are literally a reflex, that there is no gap whatsoever between an event happening or some inciting trauma or whatever and the emotional response that ensues. Somebody could say the wrong thing, and in an instant they're flying off the handle, and in their mind they feel like it's just a reaction. There's nothing I can do about it.
You'd be well, you cannot imagine how many people have told me I'm crazy, because when I say anxiety is a habit, oh, you thought I would have really insulted them. They say, "You think I like being this way?" I'm going, but
so what do you say to the people that push back on that? Because I do imagine, especially someone who's suffering from anxiety and depression, they want to and need to feel validated and heard and feel like what they're going through is normal and that it's not really their fault. So they would naturally have a pushback and, an allergic reaction to hearing that.
Well, I usually explain to them what anxiety actually is, and that it is not a mental illness. I said, doesn't matter what somebody tells you. I said, let's look at the facts. I had a patient once. We were going to do a little cataract surgery, and we covered her up, and she said, "Stop!" And I pulled up the sheet, and I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "I'm having anxiety." And I said, "So?" She said, "I can't do this." And I said, "Wait a minute. This is what I want you to do: is every time you start feeling anxious, I want you to kind of in your mind look around and see if there's any danger. Now, there isn't going to be any danger, so I want you to think about your grandchildren. You have grandchildren? Yes, I do. Okay, think about them." She got through the procedure really well. And I explained it to her after we got done, just a little bit more in depth. She came back a year later for her other one, and I almost walked past her, because I looked at her and I said, "What have you done?" I said, "You look so much younger and relaxed. What have you done?" She said, "I don't have anxiety anymore." And I patted her on the shoulder and I said, "That's great." She said, "No, no, no, no. You don't understand." And I said, "What am I missing?" She said, "I'm 58. She said, "I have been in therapy and on meds for my anxiety since I was 16. She said, "I'm no longer in therapy. I'm no longer on meds." She said, "Because I no longer have anxiety." She said, "For the first time in my life," she said, "I control my anxiety. It does not control me." I said, "That's great." She said, "I do change the channel a lot, though." So,
And all of that happened in a manner of 15, 20 seconds, one time in an operating room with you.
that's right. That's right. People,
So
when they
42 years of wasted therapy and probably psychos, what are they called? Those drugs.
yeah,
Whatever.
yeah, psychoactive drugs, I mean,
Yes, the psychoactive drug.
and all that junk. Not to mention the waste of her time. I 60% of our waking hours since COVID arrived are thinking about junk. It's anxiety.
Elaborate.
Yeah. Okay. They're thinking about, it's called a wandering mind. Some guys in Harvard, 2009, published a study. What they did is they built an app for an iPhone and then got 2,500 or so people to sign up. And what they did is the phone would call them at random times and say, "What are you doing? What are you thinking about? Is it positive, neutral, or negative?" And in 2009, 46.9% of the time, people were thinking about something other than what they were doing, and their thinking was negative. In other words, almost 50%, 8 hours. If they sleep 8 hours, that's 16 hours. They're throwing away. They are absent for half their day. But now it's up to like 60%. And some people, when I ask them, how much of your day do you think you're throwing away in this? Some of them say 80 to 90. See, their life they can't make a different choice. They're too busy thinking about, the storm that's on its way. And that's why, change the channel is so incredibly important in the breath work and everything, because it gets you to zero. But then what they need then from zero is skills that will create more tolerable and sustainable results, like in driving, that avoid the creation of negative emotions.
So what would be a good skill for that?
Well, that's why I remediate the skills of relationships, emotions, and making choices. Because if we know how to do something, we create good results and we're happy, we're okay with it. Just like in that, in the graph, when our competence is equal to the consequences, then we don't have anxiety. I mean, you get in a car, you just drive. And so, what I teach is that, once you're skillful with relationships, you're competent. Once you're skillful with making choices, you make the choices that evolve your life and benefit those around you. And and there are not very many negative emotions that you have to tend to. But if there are, you look at them and you can know that I'm feeling bad now. It's a negative emotion. But generally, my cat died or something like that. There is a reason. It's not an imaginary story. There is a reason that I have negative emotions.
Have you noticed or come across people who have kind of used their anxiety and depression as a badge of honor? I've met a few people that seem really intent on holding on to that as a label, sort of to a degree that it feels like it's a badge of honor. I have anxiety or I have depression, and it feels like it keeps them stuck, like it almost puts a lid on their box, and they have a really tough time being open to ideas that can do anything about it, because they've almost built an identity around it, and it would sacrifice or undermine that belief system of who they are and their place in the world.
Too many. And I usually, my nickname in the operating room is Thumper. You remember Thumper and Bambi?
Yeah. Bird.
Yeah, that's right. But with people like that, I say, so would you give it up if you could? I mean, I get right in their face. Would you give it up if you could? But I can't, so it doesn't mean anything. I said, okay. And I just, I'm not going to mess with them. I mean, not because a frontal attack would do nothing except cement it more, because venting is cementing.
Yep.
Yeah, you probably went to some, you're probably in your group therapies.
Yeah. Psychologists where you talk about your problems. And
yeah,
I've always felt it was like carving my name in a tree, just etching that.
Well, like I said, venting is cementing. And it doesn't, it really, if there isn't a solution, that's why going back to the anxiety graph, I say, when you start feeling anxious, say, what am I anxious about? Name the skill, name the outcome that you are anxious about, and then say, okay, I may not have the skill now, but I can find somebody who can help me upgrade the skill that I need. Right. Somebody can help me upgrade that skill level to where I am more competent. Because if they ask that question, they don't go wandering off into the abyss of wild, uncontrollable anxiety, because the source of their anxiety is their inability to do something in a way that it will result in a tolerable and sustainable outcome.
Yeah. So the question of, do I have the skills, or can I learn the skills to manage this to get what I want?
That's exactly right.
It's like that old aphorism. How did that go? If there's nothing I can do about it, there's no use in worrying. If there is something I can do about it, there's no reason to worry.
That, I would say that, yeah, but hopefully the person who said that knew what to do about the thing.
Ideally.
Yes, because he might see somebody else.
Go ahead.
Yeah, he might. I was going to say, he might see somebody doing it and know that it can be done. But I watch basketball players all the time, and I'm just absolutely just amazed by their skill. I couldn't do that. Too old, too short.
I could practice for a million years, and I'll never be able to dunk.
That's exactly right. I'm physiologically limited, But it does bring up a kind of a thing. Let's say you're out there shooting hoops, and Michael Jordan walks up and he says, "You mind if I give you a couple pointers?" You wouldn't say, "What do you know?" You'd say, "Oh, please do," or "Please do."
Yes,
yeah. And he'd say, "Well, you need to do this, and you need to hold the ball a little bit, and you need to keep your foot down, and then push." And you go like that, and it goes, shoo. And you go, "Oh, I like this." And you get a brain stem, your brain stem, goes dopamine. And he says, now practice it 1,000 or 2,000 times. And you do, and your skill will get better. And the neat thing is when we do, just like that lady that had the anxiety and had it for 42 years, she wanted to change. She was open to change. And when she tried change the channel, she got a big dopamine hit, and that tells her brain, this works. Because if we do something and it creates a better result, we get a dopamine hit or an oxytocin hit or both of them. I mean, sometimes, the cascade just goes, oh, I love this.
Yeah, that's what you were talking about earlier. It's either an upward spiral or a downward spiral, and it's like a chain reaction, this chemical chain reaction that's either lifting us up, taking us to new heights where we want to be, or dragging us down to the pits of hell where we burn in anxiety and fear and depression. So working on those skills to reach that equanimity, that equilibrium, so that we can make better choices for more positive, sustainable outcomes. We're at the 80-minute mark. So in the last closing parts of our podcast here, I always like to ask, what has been the most powerful and meaningful lesson that you've learned from life? If there were one thing that you would like to share, and if you could inoculate the whole of society with a belief or a bit of knowledge that you've acquired that's made all of the difference for you, what would that be, Douglas?
The quality of my life depends upon the quality of my life skills. And so if I'm having a problem, I just need to upgrade my skills. And there are always people available who are quantum levels better at a lot of things than we are. It's just run of the mill. So you can find them. And I think that the kids are absolutely blessed to have you show up in their lives because they need you. They need that modeling. They need your wisdom. They may not the little ones may not understand, your words, but they will understand the actions, because that's what teaches that baby brain in here. It doesn't matter whether we're 90 or whether we're 3. That brain learns by doing. So when it teach it how to do something different.
When we know better, we do better.
Absolutely.
One of my early mentors, have you heard of Jim Rohn?
Oh, yeah.
Phenomenal author, speaker, business leader, thought leader, one of my early mentors in life and business. But he said, my whole life I thought I didn't have the money. And his mentor said, it's not a lack of money, it's a lack of skills. And Jim Rohn says, up until now, I always thought being poor was a problem. And his mentor's like, no, you just don't have the skills on how to make more money. And that little tiny shift, that paradigm made all of the difference. Just knowing that I either already have the skills or I possess a capacity to learn them is the empowerment that I think everybody, but especially today's youth, need to really grasp.
Desperately. They need it desperately, because they're inheriting a world that's beyond their ability to repair.
I disagree. But we're 90 minutes into the podcast, so we could go for another hour and a half.
Easily. Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind getting it up. If they're being handed a world that is beyond their ability to repair, then there really is nihilism and no reason to persist. So I still believe and need to fundamentally, just for my core sense of well-being, that what we do have are the opportunities to change course, and that we can make a difference.
I don't disagree with that at all. I think that when I said that, we can't save what we have, probably. I mean, that's what it looks like. So there's going to be some vast changes, and that's one of my true hopes for life, is all about skills and skills and courses such like yours, is that we can empower those kids to be able to work their way through the changes that are coming.
Yeah.
Because if they take the skills that they have right now, their emotional skills, they're toast.
Yeah, it
And
will
I don't want
continue on this trajectory and escalate. You're
true.
absolutely right. Like, we're not going to be able to hang on to and grasp and covet where we're at. We can't rewind the clock and get back to 1962 and then the moral, ethical values that we had as a society back in a time better off. So
Yeah,
all we can do is learn and adapt and create a better world that we want to live in.
absolutely. And I think that's the rest of my life. You've got it in a nutshell.
I love and appreciate you, my friend. Your books are amazing, truly a gift. I recommend everybody reach out. Douglas's website is scrolling at the bottom. Do you have anything, any events coming up? Any other ways that people can reach you? Are you on Facebook, Instagram? How do people get in contact with you? And
Well, if they go to douglasmckee.com, my email is there. They can feel free to do that. I post to, but Facebook, but I'm not active in anything else. Um, you know, I've been a hermit for quite a few years.
Well, I'm really glad that we've reconnected. I'm
Oh,
really excited with the work that you're doing for the veterans. I'm really grateful for the connections that you've given and offered me, meeting with Jay and all that has come from that. And I appreciate that you see the value of what we're trying to create. I look forward to sharing some of the brilliant concepts that you've come up with, like change the channel and competency and all that stuff when I continue working with kids. Thank you so much for your time.
absolutely. When you have, if you've got a crew that needs to be, trained, send them my way and I'll do it.
Absolutely, my friend. I
Be a
appreciate you,
pleasure.
Douglas. Thank you so much.
Take care. Okay.